Russia has been stepping up its ground assaults in the eastern parts of Ukraine recently, as US President Donald Trump's patience with Vladimir Putin appears to be wearing thin. Putin's forces have been battling for the key city Pokrovsk and territory in several other regions. But Moscow is also intensifying its air attacks across Ukraine, launching one of its largest ever strikes in several regions overnight.
In one of the most intense overnight assaults in recent weeks, Russia launched a wave of drone and missile strikes across Ukraine. The Russian Defense Ministry said its forces used high-precision weapons and attack drones to carry out strikes on the country's power grid and military infrastructure. But they also hit residential areas, causing blackouts, fires, and civilian casualties. Like here in the eastern city of Dnipro, where a drone strike ripped through a 9-story building, killing several people and injuring at least a dozen more, including children.
A Shahed flew right over us. 2 or 3 minutes later, it exploded. We only survived because we were on that side. That's what they told us. It hit the 3rd floor, where they're now clearing away the debris.
Over the course of the nearly 4-year war, Russia has typically targeted Ukraine's power and heating grid in the run-up to winter, destroying large parts of key civilian infrastructure. Here in Kharkiv, emergency services sift through the debris after a Russian airstrike destroyed a fuel station, injuring 5 people. In the region around the capital, Kyiv, a barrage of airstrikes targeting energy infrastructure caused multiple fires, with several more people injured. The attacks came as fighting for the strategic city of Pokrovsk in eastern Ukraine has reached a crucial stage, with both Kyiv and Moscow vying to persuade US President Donald Trump that they can win on the battlefield.
And earlier I spoke to Marina, a military analyst from King's College London, and I asked her to explain what Russia is trying to achieve with its constant attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure.
Well, the military strategy of these long-range attacks started in October 2022, and the whole idea was to degrade Ukrainian power grid and also critical infrastructure and infrastructure used for military purposes. So we're talking about production of drones, production of missiles, and any kind of industrial sites. Therefore, what we're seeing now is a continuation of this campaign, and Russia has not been able to cause a complete blackout in Ukraine, but they are still trying to get there. And we have seen this overnight with a missile and drone attack, and knowing exactly that Ukrainian air defenses are not able to cope with this amount of drones and incoming missiles. And of course, this is also imposing a lot of costs on Ukraine, specifically because Ukraine needs more air defense systems and more interceptor missiles. So it creates also an asymmetry of costs.
Now, as we heard in the report there's also very intense fighting still going on in Pokrovsk. Why is Russia so determined to capture the city and the area surrounding it?
Pokrovsk is a very important logistical hub, and in order to conduct military operations, you need logistics. Without logistics, you cannot do anything. And Pokrovsk would open the road to Slavyansk and Kramatorsk on the one hand, but also Pavlograd in the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast and also Zaporizhia. So it is important from that point of view. Conversely, it is being used by the Ukrainian armed forces, specifically for logistics, supplying Ukrainian troops in the Donbass, in the east, east of Pokrovsk, in Miron as well. And that road, which runs towards Mirnograd, north of Pokrovsk, is already being controlled by the Russians. And so Pokrovsk is one of those cities inside the Ukrainian so-called fortress belt, which the Ukrainian armed forces have built up in order to retain control of the Donbass. If Pokrovsk were to fall from a military perspective, it would degrade Ukrainian logistics as well as a morale and, of course, give the Russian forces the opportunity to develop their offensives further west, provided that they also take Kupiansk and also Konstantinivka. So those are important directions, and thereby Russia could achieve one of its military objectives in some near future. So Pokrovsk plays a key role there, and of course it's also a city that is elevated, so it's great for defensive purposes as a stronghold, which will then be converted to a Russian stronghold. And behind Pokrovsk, there are no lines of defense, so the Russian troops could just march. And of course, there is an economic aspect of the coal, which is used for steel production, which Ukraine needs for missile production. That will be controlled by the Russians too.
Marina Miron there. Thank you very much, Marina.
Thank you for having me.
We can now speak to Domitilla Sagramoso. She's a military analyst with King's College in London. Welcome to DW. I'd like to begin with the city of Pokrovsk. There's been fierce fighting raging there for weeks, and now it seems that this fighting is intensifying. Why is this particular city so important to Russia, and how much longer can Ukraine hold on to it?
Well, this city was a very important communication hub for, logistic hub for Ukrainians. So this also explains why the Russians were trying to control it. But more importantly, this has also a symbolic value, because the Russians have argued that they want, to control the entirety of the so-called new territories. And that includes Luhansk, the Donetsk region, Zaporizhia, and Kherson. So they really need to take control over the rest of the areas of the Donetsk region or oblast, because they have a very strong sort of symbolic value. And what is important is that this summer, the offensive that was carried out by the Russians hadn't really managed to take control of any significant city or communications hub. So this also represents sort of a sign that Russia can sort of continue in its advances, and also to show the strength, for example, to President Trump, that the Russians are constantly advancing, and therefore, negotiations should take place in favor of Russia. What is interesting is the way in which the Russians have managed to take control over this whole area, because they have managed to not only send a very high number of men, we're talking that this whole area has about 110,000 men operating there, but also they have sent one of their top teams in terms of UAVs, so unmanned aerial vehicles operators, who have managed to counter Ukrainian drone systems. And they've managed also to make it difficult for Ukrainians to provide logistic support to the forces that were trying to defend Pokrovsk. So they really managed to sort of break this whole network of support that the city was having. And that's why they slowly advanced from many sides, and they managed to encircle it. And they managed to take control slowly by sending very small numbers of peoples, sometimes, of infantrymen, sometimes disguised as civilians. And that made it harder, of course, for Ukrainians to identify who the enemy was. But if we look at the total numbers of people inside, of Russians inside the city, the numbers are not very high. We're talking about 300, maybe 400. And what the Ukrainians are trying to do is to hit at them as much as possible, to kill as many Russians as possible, so to say.
Well, along with this focus on the eastern part of Ukraine, another key strategy of Russia has been targeting Ukraine's energy infrastructure also throughout the country. Now we're seeing the war entering its fourth winter. So this is, of course, very serious for Ukrainian civilians. Are there any lessons from previous winters that Ukraine can apply to protect its energy infrastructure against these latest Russian attacks?
Yes, I mean, they have, on the one hand, they have in cities these sort of support points where people can go and recharge their computers, their phones, where they can take shelter, where they can, in theory, also be working underground. So there are all these points where people know where to do to take shelter and to sort of continue with their essential activities. Many businesses have their own power generators. And what the Ukrainians have done more sort of strategically is, first of all, they have connected, for example, the electricity grid to the European grid. And whereas there were many losses in 2024, what is interesting is that if we look at electricity, a lot of it was recovered. The electricity production of Ukraine was recovered during 2025 until September, more or less, when Russia again started hitting really hard. But this was to the point that, Ukraine was exporting electricity to Europe during the summer. So this really shows the resilience and the capacity of Ukrainians to sort of restore and reestablish their energy grids. Also, what they're doing is they're creating, storage facilities. There's a huge system of storage facilities with sort of six different storage centers. So that is helping. But of course, this hit has been severe, and we have to see how they manage throughout the winter.
That was Domitilla Sagramoso from King's College London. Many thanks indeed for your analysis. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And with the war in Ukraine grinding on, many Ukrainians feel not enough attention is being paid to the conflict anymore after 3 years of war. Ukrainian veteran Andrii Madzharov wants to change that by walking from Ukraine all the way to Brussels in Belgium. His journey has attracted many followers on social media and helped him to raise money for the Ukrainian army. DW's Ksenia Polska joined the final kilometers of his walk.
This Ukrainian war veteran has walked 1,500 kilometers, past more than 60 towns and cities across 4 countries. Andrii Madzharov departed from Ukraine 3 months ago, and he's now in Belgium.
I often got sunburned, and I had large blisters on my toes and feet, but I still had to keep going. I had no idea what awaited me the next day, because the route I had planned when I was still in Ukraine turned out completely differently, and the maps did not show the actual situation on the roads.
But Andrii is not walking alone anymore. He says he's made friends in all the places he's passed through, and also thanks to his campaign on social media. Some of his supporters came to accompany him to the finish line and show their patriotism. Andrii's destination is Brussels, the capital of Belgium, but more importantly also the European Union and NATO. The last stop before the finish line, the town of Krainem, 8 kilometers from Brussels. This is where his new friends are waiting for him. A special welcome by the mayor of the town, who, surprise, speaks Ukrainian.
Слава Україні! Я думаю, це у Європі. І
I think that Europe and Europeans should understand that Ukraine is defending not only itself, but also the whole of Europe.
Не тільки себе, але також усю Європу.
Time to head off to the final stop. Why did you choose Brussels?
It is the centre of global decision-making regarding the European continent, partner countries and Ukraine, both in this war and beyond.
The veteran wanted to show the world that Ukrainian spirit is unbreakable. And here he is, after 93 days on the road.
Tired but undefeated, just like Ukraine and the Ukrainian people. Everything is for the sake of victory, so there's still a lot of work ahead. My brain hasn't quite caught up with the fact that I've made it, so I'm just feeling calm, but I'm happy that I won't have to walk such long distances anymore.
Now Andrii is preparing to meet with some members of the European Parliament and other decision makers in Brussels to remind them that they have to unite to stop Russian aggression.